Elon Musk stepped onto the sleek, polished floor of the private jet's cabin, his worn-out suit from back-to-back meetings still clinging to him like a shadow. His mind raced with thoughts of SpaceX's next launch, Tesla's latest innovations, and the never-ending pressure to stay ahead of the curve. He had just wrapped up another series of intense discussions about the future of technology, and his body ached for a moment of peace. This flight, he hoped, would offer that escape. A few hours of solitude as he made his way to the next big conference. He was used to the luxuries that came with his status, the fine champagne, the personalized service, and the constant praise. The private jet was a familiar space, a refuge from the demands of the world outside. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. A young woman, probably in her mid-20s, stood by the door, holding a clipboard. She had a crisp uniform, her dark hair neatly tied in a bun, and a look of professionalism that Elon had seen 1,000 times before. She smiled as he approached, but there was something in her expression, a flicker of indifference, that caught him off guard. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, her tone polite but almost robotic. "Welcome aboard. Can I offer you a drink?" Elon smiled back, trying to maintain his composure. "Thank you. A glass of champagne would be great," he replied, settling into one of the plush leather chairs by the window. His fingers brushed the smooth surface of the seat as he leaned back, eager to relax. The stewardess nodded and walked toward the bar area. Elon let out a long, tired breath, glancing out the window as the jet's engines began to hum, signaling the imminent takeoff. The world outside seemed so distant, so insignificant, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to forget the weight of his responsibilities. But then, the moment was shattered. The stewardess returned with a glass of champagne, but as she approached, her arm brushed against the edge of the cart. The glass wobbled. Time seemed to slow down, and then, with a gentle but unmistakable thud, the champagne splashed across Elon's lap, soaking through the fabric of his suit. For a split second, the world seemed to freeze. Elon's mind raced. His body stiffened in disbelief. But what struck him wasn't just the accident. It was the way she responded. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir," she said, her eyes avoiding his. "I'll get you a napkin." It wasn't the apology that stung. It was the coldness behind it, the lack of genuine concern. The way she dismissed him like he was just another rich businessman who could afford to dry clean his suit later. Elon sat frozen, the feeling of being humiliated creeping up his spine. He glanced at her face. No sign of panic, no urgency. She was just doing her job, no different than how she had served countless other passengers before him. "You okay?" she asked, still avoiding eye contact. His chest tightened as he fought the urge to lash out. He had been in countless high-pressure situations, navigating the chaos of SpaceX's demanding launches, negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, but never had he felt so invisible, so dismissed. It was a strange, unfamiliar feeling. He cleared his throat and nodded stiffly, wiping at the stain with his handkerchief. "It's fine," he muttered, his voice colder than he intended, "but I'd appreciate it if you'd be a bit more careful next time." The stewardess offered a quick, detached smile. "Of course, sir. I'll be right back with a towel." As she hurried off to the back of the jet, Elon was left sitting there, his mind spinning. How could she be so careless? So indifferent? This wasn't just about the drink, he realized. This was something deeper. The feeling of being judged, of being treated like an insignificant part of the luxury machine, was something he had never truly experienced before. He had always been the one with power, the one who made the rules. But right now, in this moment, he felt small, insignificant. He leaned back in his seat, staring out the window, but his thoughts were racing in every direction. How could she not know who I am? It wasn't just about the jet, the money, or the fame. Elon Musk had spent his entire life fighting against the odds, building his companies from nothing, changing the way the world thought about space, cars, and technology. He was a visionary, a man whose name was synonymous with innovation. Yet here he was, humiliated in a way he had never imagined. A young stewardess, dismissing him with a coolness that sent a shiver down his spine. He could feel his temper rising, but a part of him, somewhere deep inside, was hesitant. He had always prided himself on taking the high road, on thinking beyond the surface. But in this moment, he wasn't sure if that would be enough. The engines roared louder as the jet picked up speed, and Elon's thoughts slowly shifted. Maybe it was time to stop letting the world define him. Maybe it was time to confront this feeling, this moment of vulnerability. For a brief moment, he imagined confronting her, revealing who he truly was. But would that even change anything? Would it be enough to erase the coldness she had shown him? And then, just as quickly, he thought about the other possibility, the one where he simply let it go. After all, this was just one more minor inconvenience in the whirlwind of his life. But one thing was clear. This wasn't going to be a simple flight anymore. The events of the day had already set the wheels of something bigger in motion. As the jet soared higher into the sky, Elon Musk could feel the weight of the moment settle over him, like a thick cloud. There was something about the way he was treated, something about the way the world still saw him, that he knew would follow him long after this flight. He just wasn't sure yet what it would mean, but he was about to find out. Elon Musk leaned back in his seat, staring out the window at the sky, a distant, quiet expression settling on his face. His thoughts wandered, drifting back to a time when life was simpler. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Elon had always been the kind of child who asked, why, more than any parent could answer. The child of a Canadian mother and a South African father, Elon's early life wasn't marked by wealth. His family was comfortable, but far from the billion-dollar lifestyle he would one day lead. His father, a skilled engineer, was distant and often harsh, while his mother was an artist who encouraged his curiosity. Despite the challenges, Elon was a natural dreamer, and it was in the quiet of his room surrounded by books that his future began to take shape. From a young age, he had a thirst for knowledge, diving deep into books about space, technology, and the future of humanity. He taught himself computer programming and at the age of 12, sold his first software, a video game called Blaster, for $500. But this early success didn't mean much in the eyes of his peers. Elon often felt like an outsider, misunderstood, isolated, someone who was thinking about things no one else could see. He was, in many ways, the perfect blend of visionary and outcast. But it wasn't until he moved to Canada to attend Queen's University and then later transferred to the University of Pennsylvania that his dream of transforming the world started to crystallize. He didn't come to America with a pocket full of riches, but with a burning desire to create something that would change the course of history. He left school to pursue his entrepreneurial ventures, a decision that his professors and peers criticized at the time, but one that would later become the foundation of his empire. He founded Zip2, an online city guide, which he later sold for $307 million. He didn't stop there. Instead of settling into his newfound wealth, Elon reinvested every penny into ventures that would push humanity to the next level. X.com, which eventually became PayPal, and then, of course, Tesla and SpaceX. But it wasn't always glamorous. In the early years, SpaceX almost went bankrupt after 3 failed rocket launches. Tesla faced near collapse several times, and the pressure weighed heavily on Elon. He was often portrayed as arrogant, a workaholic with no regard for personal relationships or boundaries. To the outside world, he was the tech mogul who seemed untouchable, a genius who had it all figured out. Yet, despite his achievements, Elon often found himself questioning if this was really the life he wanted. Did the pressure, the constant criticism, the broken relationships, and the near-fatal business collapses come at too high a cost? For all the world's praise, Elon had long carried a quiet loneliness. His mind was constantly at war with his body, his work pushing him to limits that made even his most loyal friends question his sanity. He had come to realize that success was not always a guarantee of happiness. Fame didn't mean understanding, and wealth didn't bring peace of mind. But still, he pressed forward, chasing the next great frontier. Now, sitting on the private jet, the remnants of the champagne stain on his lap a painful reminder of his vulnerability, Elon couldn't help but reflect on how different things felt in this moment. Sure, the world saw him as a visionary, but here, in this luxurious cabin, he was just another man seeking a brief escape. And yet, the stewardess, Clara, had no idea who he was. To her, He was simply a passenger. Her eyes had scanned him like she was looking at every other rich person who stepped into her domain, and she had treated him accordingly, detached, indifferent, and impersonal. He leaned forward and checked his watch, his reflection shifting to that of the past. It had been a long road to get here, and now, despite the billion-dollar empire, he was left asking himself, is this really what it's all about? The constant cycle of building and achieving, only to end up on yet another flight, lost in a sea of fleeting moments and faces. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more he was searching for, something beyond the headlines, beyond the fortunes. As he replayed the awkward exchange with Clara, Elon couldn't help but wonder what her story was. What drove her to treat him like just another face in the crowd? Was she like him, someone who worked tirelessly for a dream, or was she just a product of the world around her, a world that made her feel superior because of the high-end service she provided? Elon's thoughts were interrupted as Clara returned to the cabin, a clean towel in hand. Her face was flushed, an attempt at politeness now visible in her actions. She didn't look at him directly as she handed him the towel, her voice apologetic, but still distant. "I'm really sorry about the spill, Mr. Musk. I hope it didn't cause too much inconvenience." For a brief moment, Elon considered correcting her, telling her that she had no idea who he was, how his name carried weight across the world. But instead, he paused. He could feel the weight of her assumption press on him, but the anger had begun to fade into something else, something quieter. A curiosity. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his tone softening. "It's fine. These things happen." Clara looked up at him, surprised by his calm response. There was no trace of the sharp edge she had expected. She simply nodded and began to walk away, but Elon called out to her, more out of curiosity than anything else. "Clara," he said, his voice carrying just a hint of warmth, "you don't have to treat me like a stranger. I'm just another person. Just be kind." Her steps faltered, and she turned back toward him, confusion written on her face. I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable, Mr. Musk. It's just, well, you're someone very important and I don't know what to say." He smiled slightly, the irony of it all sinking in. "Maybe the answer isn't in what you say. Maybe it's in how you treat people. We're all just people, Clara. No more, no less." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Clara, still uncertain, gave a small nod before retreating toward the galley, leaving Elon alone with his thoughts. As the jet cruised at 30,000 feet, Elon couldn't help but wonder where the next leg of his journey would take him, whether it would lead him closer to the answers he was seeking or further into the chaos he had long tried to escape. But there was one thing he knew for sure. Things were changing. His encounter with Clara, the unexpected humbling, was only the beginning, and he wasn't sure what to make of it yet. The next few days passed in a blur for Elon. He flew from one city to the next, attending meetings, making presentations, and pushing forward the companies that had become his life's work. But no matter how important the next deal or how groundbreaking the next project, there was something gnawing at him, something he couldn't quite shake. The memory of Clara's indifference, her cold professionalism, lingered in his mind. He had always been a man in control, a person who demanded respect through his actions and achievements. Yet that one brief interaction with her, the stewardess who had no idea who he was, had left him questioning everything. It was a strange discomfort that he hadn't felt in years. To be treated like a mere passenger, just another face in the crowd of elite customers, made him feel like an outsider in a world that was supposed to be his. As much as he wanted to dismiss it as a minor incident, the more he thought about it, the more it didn't sit right. It wasn't just the lack of recognition. It was the sense that, despite all his wealth and power, he was still being reduced to a commodity, something to be used and forgotten. The world around him, the world he had worked so hard to shape, often seemed so detached from him, so impersonal. The jet's cabin had been a microcosm of that feeling. A world where people were merely actors, playing their parts with little thought of who was in the audience. And Clara, who had no interest in who he was beyond the surface, had unknowingly pushed him into a place of uncomfortable vulnerability. It wasn't just Clara anymore. It was a deeper question, one that had been building for years but had never been fully acknowledged. Am I more than just the image the world sees? The tension was growing, but Elon didn't know how to release it. The pressure was mounting, especially with the demands of SpaceX and Tesla, both of which were on the cusp of major breakthroughs. The future of humanity's space exploration, the future of sustainable energy, all rested on his shoulders. But in those quiet moments, he couldn't ignore the mounting sense of disconnection from his own life. Back at his sprawling mansion in California, he sat alone on the balcony, looking out at the city lights below. His phone buzzed with notifications, emails, stock updates, project deadlines. But he was no longer interested in the never-ending hustle. Instead, he found himself lost in the quiet hum of his own thoughts. Was this really what he wanted? Even as the creator of some of the world's most innovative companies, the world's fascination with him had always felt shallow. Elon didn't want to be admired simply for his ability to amass wealth and change industries. He wanted more, something deeper, something meaningful. He didn't just want to be a name on a magazine cover. He wanted to be seen as a human being, someone with passions, struggles, and desires beyond the empire he had built. His phone buzzed again, breaking his train of thought. This time, it was a message from Gwyneth, his ex-wife, a reminder of their ongoing co-parenting arrangement for their children. They were still friendly, but the bitterness of their separation lingered in the background of every conversation. "Have you spoken to the kids today?" she asked. Elon sighed, tapping out a quick response, but the words felt hollow. Yes, he'd spoken to them, brief check-ins, like he always did. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing out on something important. As much as he had tried to dedicate himself to his children, there was always something more pressing, another deadline or meeting to take his attention away. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. He answered immediately. "Elon, we've got a situation," the voice on the other end said, urgency in his tone. "The next rocket test launch is scheduled for tomorrow, but we've encountered some major issues with the fuel tank integration. We need your decision on whether to proceed or delay." Elon felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with the high-stakes nature of his companies. This was what he was made for, decisions that could change the course of history. But even as he heard the technical details and the challenges facing them, his mind was still preoccupied with the events of the past few days. "Let's go ahead with the launch," he said, his voice steady despite the growing tension within him. "Make the necessary adjustments, but don't compromise on safety. I'll be there for the countdown." He ended the call, but the weight of his responsibilities still pressed down on him. He was about to make a decision that could affect the future of space exploration, yet his mind was still lingering on Clara and the strange encounter that had started to unravel something deeper inside of him. He had bigger problems, he knew that. But this feeling, this quiet discomfort, had been building for so long. It was starting to crack the surface. The phone buzzed once more, and this time, it was a message from his assistant, reminding him about a crucial meeting with Tesla's board later that week. More decisions, more responsibilities. His life was a constant cycle of pressure, but right now, it felt like too much to handle. He stood up from the balcony, pacing around his mansion, trying to shake off the feeling that had taken root in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was losing control of something that should have been second nature. "Maybe I need a break," he thought, the idea feeling more appealing than anything else in the past few months. "Maybe I need to stop being the man everyone expects me to be and just be me for once." And that thought, that fleeting moment of vulnerability, led him to an idea, a chance to do something completely different, something unexpected. He had always embraced the unknown in business, but could he do the same in his personal life? Could he walk away from the persona he had built and just be Elon Musk? Not the billionaire CEO, not the relentless innovator, but just the person underneath it all? As the night stretched on, Elon knew one thing for sure. Something had to change. He was no longer content to play by the rules that the world had set for him. He wasn't just going to let his life continue on autopilot. The next step, his next challenge, wasn't going to be about rockets or electric cars. It was going to be about himself. But he wasn't yet sure how or where that journey would take him. And then, as if on cue, The thought of Clara flashed through his mind again. Perhaps she wasn't just a stewardess after all. Perhaps in her, there was a reflection of the world he had been so desperately trying to change. Maybe she knew something he didn't. And that thought, that nagging feeling, would follow him wherever he went next. Elon was no stranger to unexpected turns in life. His career, after all, was built on a series of high-risk decisions and bold ventures. Yet, nothing prepared him for the curveball that was about to unfold, one that would take him on a journey that neither he nor anyone around him could have predicted. It started with an impulsive decision. The weight of his responsibilities, the endless cycle of meetings, launches, and deadlines. It all became too much. Elon had always thrived on chaos, but this time, he needed something different. A break. A pause. He boarded another private jet, but this time, there was no business agenda. No new technology to unveil. No investors to impress. Just him. The flight was supposed to be a quiet, solitary retreat. An opportunity to clear his mind. Elon was heading to a remote cabin in the mountains of Wyoming. A place where no one would find him, where he could escape the press, the critics, and the never-ending barrage of notifications. But things, as they often did not go as planned. As the plane touched down, the skies above were overcast, the snow-covered landscape stretching out beneath him. The air felt thinner up here, but it was clean, crisp, and silent. Just what he needed. Elon stepped off the jet and inhaled deeply, hoping to shake off the tension that had been creeping into his bones for weeks. There was a strange sense of calm as he made his way to the cabin, the only sound the crunch of snow beneath his boots. For the first time in what felt like ages, he didn't have a plan. He didn't have a strategy. He was just a man seeking some peace, a man searching for something outside the empire he had built. The cabin was rustic, charming in its simplicity, nestled in the valley of a snow-capped mountain range. It felt like the perfect place to disconnect. But as he entered the cabin, Elon noticed something strange. There was a figure inside. Clara, the stewardess. Elon froze at the door. He hadn't expected to see her here. What was she doing in a remote cabin in the mountains, far from the world she knew? Clara, on the other hand, seemed just as shocked to see him. She stood there, frozen in place, staring at him like he was a ghost. The same cold professionalism she had shown on the plane was now replaced by a hint of unease. "Mr. Musk," she stammered, her voice uncertain, as if unsure whether to apologize, explain, or run. I didn't expect to see you here." Elon's mind raced. What were the odds? He had flown in for some solitude, away from the demands of his world, and somehow, she had ended up here too. But why? "Clara," he said slowly, his tone more curious than accusatory. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes shifted, clearly uncomfortable. She looked around the room, as if searching for an escape, before meeting his gaze again. I work here," she admitted, her voice low. "It's my family's cabin. It's been in the family for generations. I came up to check on it. It's been a while since I've had a chance to come up here." Elon couldn't quite process the information. Of all the places in the world, he had found her here. Alone. No staff, no luxury jet, no world of high society or glamorous settings. Just a woman, in the middle of nowhere, trying to reconnect with something she had left behind. Something about this felt different than anything Elon had ever experienced. "Why here?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "You could be anywhere." Clara shifted uncomfortably, then shrugged. "Sometimes, you just need to get away from everything. Find something real. You know?" Elon didn't respond immediately. He was still processing the coincidence, but at the same time, there was something raw about the way she spoke, something that felt real in a way his own world never did. The more he looked at her, the more he realized that, despite her professional demeanor, Clara seemed far more complicated than he'd given her credit for. "I thought I was the only one looking for peace and quiet," Elon muttered, more to himself than to her. "Turns out, I'm not." Clara managed a small smile, though it was laced with an underlying tension. "I guess we're both in the right place for it then." The awkward silence stretched between them, each of them unsure of what to say next. Elon broke it first. Do you mind if I stay? I wasn't expecting company, he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from the fireplace. Clara hesitated but nodded. Of course. There's plenty of space. It's just strange. I didn't think I'd be meeting anyone here. Especially not you. Elon couldn't help but let out a dry laugh. Same here. But I suppose we're both at a crossroads. She raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. Crossroads? Elon leaned back in his chair, staring into the fire. Yeah, I've spent so much time trying to make the future happen. I've lost sight of the present. I've been chasing something, some bigger idea of success, but I'm starting to realize I don't even know what I'm really chasing anymore. Clara studied him for a moment, and for the first time, she seemed to see him as something more than just a billionaire. Her gaze softened, a subtle understanding in her eyes. Maybe you're not supposed to have all the answers, she said quietly. Maybe it's okay to just be lost for a while. Elon looked up at her, taken aback by her words. He wasn't used to people speaking to him like that, like he was just another person, struggling with the same things everyone else did. The silence that followed was less uncomfortable now. It was the kind of silence that allowed both of them to reflect on the strange, unexpected nature of the moment. And in that silence, something began to shift in Elon. This place, this remote, quiet cabin, wasn't just a retreat. It was a turning point. A place where he could drop the facade of being the indomitable Elon Musk and just be himself. It was a small realization, but it was a powerful one. In a world that constantly demanded more, maybe it was time to take a step back. Maybe it was time to stop chasing success and start looking for something deeper, something human, something real. And in Clara's quiet understanding, he saw a glimpse of that possibility. It was strange, unpredictable, but somehow it felt right. The next few days would be transformative for both of them. As they spent time together in that secluded cabin, conversations flowed in ways they never would have expected. There was no pressure, no expectations. Just two people, disconnected from the world they knew, sharing their thoughts and fears. For the first time in a long while, Elon felt like he was more than just the sum of his achievements. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to find the answers he had been searching for all along. But the journey wasn't over. This encounter, this unexpected twist in his life, was just the beginning of something much bigger. And little did he know, the encounter with Clara would lead to more than just self-discovery. It would set him on a path that would forever change his perspective on the world and his place in it. The days in the cabin passed with an unusual sense of peace. For once, Elon wasn't rushing from one meeting to the next. There were no deadlines, no investors breathing down his neck, just the warmth of a crackling fire, the soft sound of the wind outside, and the occasional hum of conversation between him and Clara. It was as though the world outside the cabin had ceased to exist, a world filled with demands, expectations, and never-ending ambition. Here, he could simply breathe, could just be. But of course, that serenity couldn't last forever. A storm, as it always does, began to brew on the horizon. It started with a casual conversation, an offhand remark from Clara as they sipped hot cocoa by the fire one night. "So, how did you really get started in all of this?" she asked, motioning around the room with a wave. "The whole business empire thing?" Elon leaned back in his chair, glancing at her with a raised eyebrow. He had expected to talk about anything but work in this place, his refuge from the world. Yet, in some strange way, the question didn't feel intrusive. There was something about Clara, the way she asked, that made him feel comfortable. "I started with a vision," Elon began, his voice distant as memories resurfaced. "A vision that we could build the future, make space travel a reality for everyone, and create sustainable energy so the world didn't destroy itself. I wanted to change the world." Clara nodded, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "And did you?" Elon was silent for a moment, the weight of her question sinking in. He had achieved things most people could only dream of. SpaceX had launched rockets, and Tesla had changed the automotive industry. But there was still something gnawing at him, something missing. "I guess I've done what I set out to do," he said, his voice quiet. "But there's always more to do, always more to build. It never stops." You never get to just be. Clara was quiet for a moment, as if considering his words. I get that, but is that really what you want? Elon turned to face her, surprised by the bluntness of her question. She was probing deeper than he'd expected. Of course it's what I want, he said, perhaps a little too defensively. I want to leave a legacy. I want to make the world better. Clara nodded again, but there was a hint of something else in her gaze, a skepticism that Elon couldn't quite place. But maybe you're already doing it. Maybe being who you are, without the pressure of always achieving, is what really makes the difference. Elon stared at her, her words hitting him harder than he wanted to admit. He had spent so many years consumed with success that he had lost sight of what truly mattered. He was building a future for humanity, but in the process, he had forgotten to live for himself, to experience joy, peace, or simply the beauty of being present. Before he could respond, Clara stood up abruptly, walking over to the window. She gazed out at the swirling snowstorm outside, the world outside cloaked in white silence. You know, Clara said quietly, her back to him, I used to think I needed something bigger, a career, a life that looked impressive. I thought I was supposed to be someone else. But the more I ran after that, the more I lost myself. Elon watched her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. It wasn't the same woman who had dismissed him on the plane. This was someone different, someone real. He couldn't help but feel a tug of curiosity and even admiration. Why are you telling me this? Elon asked, his voice softer than usual. Clara turned to face him, her expression a mixture of sadness and understanding. Because, Mr. Musk, I think you're running after something that isn't real. The world you've built, the legacy you've worked so hard to create. It's all real, yes. But it's also just a part of you, not the whole picture. Elon felt a pang in his chest at her words, but he didn't respond. The weight of her insight hung in the air, like a thick fog that refused to lift. There was something else in Clara's eyes now, something more than sympathy, something Elon hadn't seen before. Compassion. It was then that it hit him, the truth he had been running from for years. He had spent his entire life trying to be someone the world would remember, someone who could achieve the impossible. But in doing so, he had neglected the most important part of his journey, himself. He had built his empire from the ground up, but it was hollow. There was no one else with him, no one to share in the victory, no one to truly know him. Had he become a prisoner of his own success? The realization settled in him like a stone, heavy and undeniable. He had climbed so high, but in the process, he had distanced himself from everything that truly mattered, his own humanity, his own soul. And Clara, of all people, had seen through that mask. She had seen the cracks in his carefully constructed identity and had called him out on them. In a way, she had been the mirror he didn't even know he needed. I've spent so much time chasing the future, he murmured, barely above a whisper, that I've missed my life passing by. Clara's gaze softened. It's never too late to change, to live. Elon nodded slowly, the weight of his realization still sinking in. For the first time, he understood what she meant. The journey he had been on, one of ambition, innovation, and limitless possibility, wasn't the end of the story. It was just one chapter, a chapter that had, perhaps, overshadowed all the others. And now, at this moment, in this remote cabin with a woman who had no idea who he was beyond the headlines, Elon saw for the first time that the true journey, the one that really mattered, wasn't about achieving the impossible. It was about learning to live in the present, to find joy in the quiet moments, to truly be seen. The storm outside raged on, but inside, the fire crackled warmly. Elon looked at Clara, his heart a little lighter, his mind more at ease. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected encounter was the start of something new, something he wasn't ready to plan or control, but to simply experience. And for the first time in a long while, he was ready to take that step. The future, it seemed, could wait. For now, the journey was about finding peace. The storm outside had reached its peak. Snow fell in thick, swirling sheets, and the howling wind battered against the cabin, a constant reminder that the world beyond was vast and unforgiving. Yet, inside the cabin, there was an unusual calm. For days now, Elon had stayed in that quiet space, with Clara by his side. What had started as a simple escape from the relentless pressure of his life had evolved into something much more. It wasn't just the isolation that had provided peace. It was the conversations, the moments of honesty that had slowly unraveled something deep inside him. Every morning, Clara had made coffee and they would sit together by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. And in each conversation, Elon found pieces of himself that he had forgotten. He spoke of his early struggles, his fears, and the doubts that had always lingered, even beneath his public persona. Clara listened with no judgment, no expectation, and no ulterior motive. She simply listened. And for Elon, that was something rare. So rare, in fact, that it felt almost surreal. But as the days wore on, a part of him knew that this moment, this unexpected retreat, couldn't last forever. The world he had stepped away from was still there, waiting for him to return, and there were still things he had to face. On the fourth morning of the storm, Clara had suggested they take a walk through the woods. The storm had let up, and the snow had settled, leaving the world outside transformed into a winter wonderland. Reluctantly, Elon agreed. He wasn't one for walks in the woods, but something about her invitation, something about the way she made everything feel so simple, made him want to follow her. The woods were quiet, the only sounds the crunch of snow beneath their boots and the occasional creak of tree branches as the wind passed through. It felt surreal, walking through a world that felt both timeless and suspended. "I don't think I've ever seen anything so beautiful," Elon remarked, his breath visible in the cold air as he looked around at the snow-covered trees. "It's like a different world up here." Clara smiled softly. It's easy to forget how beautiful things can be when you're always looking ahead, always focused on the next big thing. Sometimes, you have to stop and just see. Elon paused for a moment, looking down at his boots. Was that what he had been doing all this time? Chasing the next big thing, always looking ahead but never truly experiencing the present? "You're right," he said quietly. "I've spent so much time planning, preparing, building, that I forgot to look around and just appreciate what's right in front of me." They walked in silence for a few moments, the snow falling gently around them, the cold air fresh in their lungs. For the first time in a long while, Elon felt free. He felt unburdened by the weight of his success, the expectations, the constant pressure to keep achieving. When they reached a clearing, Clara stopped and turned to him. "Elon, I know you came up here to escape, but you're at a crossroads. The question is, what are you going to do now?" Elon felt a pang of anxiety. The question seemed simple, but it was anything but. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice sounding small against the backdrop of the vast, quiet woods. "I mean," Clara began, her voice calm but filled with an undeniable strength. "You've spent so much of your life chasing something. A legacy, a future for humanity. But you've missed something along the way. You've missed the now." Elon didn't know how to respond. She was right, of course. He had dedicated himself to building things, to changing the world, but he had neglected the relationships, the moments, the simple joys that could make life truly worth living. I think I've been so afraid of losing everything I've built that I didn't realize I was losing myself in the process," he said, the weight of his words settling heavily on his chest. "I've built companies, changed industries, but what if I've neglected the most important part of all?" Clara looked at him with an expression that was both understanding and gentle. "It's not too late to change that, you know. You can still have all of those things, the success, the legacy, but you have to start living for the moments in between, the small moments, the ones that you've been too busy to notice." Elon swallowed hard. The storm had passed, the sky above them clearing. The sun peeked through the trees, casting a warm golden light over the snow. He could feel something stirring inside him, a sense of clarity. "I don't know how to do that," he admitted, his voice softer now. "I don't know how to stop chasing the future." Clara stepped closer to him, her voice steady but filled with hope. "You don't have to stop chasing it. You just need to let yourself be in the present, too. You don't have to let the future define you completely. It's okay to just live, to be here, to be you." Elon's heart swelled, his chest tightening as he realized how much he had needed to hear those words. It was okay. It was okay to be uncertain. It was okay to not have all the answers. I'm afraid that if I stop, he said quietly, everything I've worked for will fall apart. That if I don't keep moving forward, I'll lose everything. Clara smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. You're not alone in this, Elon. And even if you feel lost sometimes, that doesn't mean you've lost everything. It just means you're finding your way. For the first time in a long time, Elon didn't feel like he had to prove anything. He didn't have to be the billionaire visionary or the genius innovator. For a moment, he could just be a man. Someone struggling to find balance in a world that demanded everything from him. It wasn't easy. It wouldn't be easy. But as he stood there in the quiet woods with Clara, he realized something. The future would always be there. But it was the present, the small moments of peace and connection, that would carry him through. He took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs, and made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't stop chasing the future, but he would learn to live in the present, to stop running, and to simply be. And with that, Elon Musk, the man who had always been driven by the desire to change the world, realized that perhaps the most important change he needed to make was within himself. The future could wait. Today was enough. As they turned to walk back to the cabin, the snow falling gently around them, Elon knew that his journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was walking it with purpose. Purpose not to create, but to live. The days that followed the storm were different. Elon and Clara returned to the cabin after their walk in the woods, their steps slower, more deliberate. The world outside had transformed into a pristine winter landscape, but something within Elon had shifted as well. The fog of his constant striving had begun to lift, leaving behind a clearer sense of self. He didn't know exactly what the future would look like. He wasn't sure how the pressures of the outside world, his empire, and the expectations of those around him would fit into the new life he envisioned. But for the first time in years, he wasn't rushing to find the answers. That was the gift Clara had given him, the permission to be still, to sit with the uncertainty, the discomfort, and yet find peace in it. It wasn't about having all the answers anymore. It was about being okay with the questions. As the sun rose the next morning, casting a golden glow on the snow, Elon stood at the window of the cabin. His reflection in the glass seemed unfamiliar. It wasn't the reflection of the CEO, the visionary, or the billionaire. It was simply him, a man who had spent a lifetime forging an identity based on achievement, now questioning what it meant to just be. Clara came into the room, bringing with her a pot of fresh coffee. She placed it down on the table beside him and stood there for a moment, as if waiting for him to speak. "What now?" Elon asked, his voice a mixture of uncertainty and curiosity. "How do I move forward from here?" Clara smiled, her eyes soft yet filled with a quiet wisdom. "You start by not trying to figure it all out. You don't have to have everything planned. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is just take a step forward, no matter how small." Elon took a deep breath, letting her words settle in his mind. For years, his entire life had been about plans, a rigid blueprint for the future. But now, Clara's simple suggestion to let go of that pressure felt like a revelation. It was as though the weight of 1,000 decisions had been lifted from his shoulders. He didn't need to have it all figured out. It was okay to make mistakes. It was okay to learn as he went. "I've spent so much time focused on the future," he said quietly, "that I forgot to live in the now. I think I'm finally starting to understand what that means." Clara nodded. "It's not about abandoning your goals or your dreams, Elon. It's about integrating them with your life in a way that allows you to enjoy the journey, not just the destination." Elon looked out the window again, his gaze lingering on the horizon. The sun had fully risen now, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. It was a beautiful, fleeting moment, and for the first time, he was truly seeing it. "I think I'm ready for a new beginning," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. Clara's eyes shone with understanding, her voice warm but grounded. "That's the first step. You're already on your way." The following week, Elon made a decision. He reached out to his closest team members at SpaceX and Tesla, informing them that he would be taking some time off to reflect and regroup. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew that he needed to take a step back from the intensity of his usual routine to recalibrate. He knew there would be skepticism, perhaps even some pushback. After all, he had never been one to retreat. But this was different. For the first time, he understood that in order to keep moving forward, he had to take a step back. When the news went public, there was an immediate frenzy in the media. Headlines speculated about his reasons for stepping away. Was he overwhelmed? Had something gone wrong? Was he contemplating a new direction entirely? The questions flooded in, but Elon didn't feel the need to answer them right away. Instead, he let the world wonder. It was during this time of stillness that Elon began to see his life and his purpose with more clarity. His work at SpaceX and Tesla was important, of course. The innovations, the technologies, the future he was building, all of it mattered. But he also began to realize that he mattered, not just as a figurehead, but as a person, someone who deserved to live fully, to experience life beyond the grind of work. He reconnected with old friends, taking the time to nurture relationships that had long been neglected. He spent more time with his children, appreciating the small moments of laughter and joy that had once been overshadowed by his career. And with each passing day, he felt lighter, more at peace. Through it all, Clara remained a quiet presence in his life. Though she had returned to her own work and responsibilities, their bond had deepened. He found himself reaching out to her not just for advice, but for companionship. She had become more than just a sounding board. She had become a part of his journey. As they sat together one evening, watching the sun set over the mountains, Elon turned to her and said, "I used to think I had to be everything to everyone. The genius, the innovator, the leader. But now, I realize, I just need to be me." Clara smiled, her gaze soft. "You don't need to be anything other than who you are, Elon. And that's what's going to make the biggest impact." The words resonated with him deeply. For years, he had sought validation through achievements, through accolades. But now, he was discovering that true impact came not from what you build, but from who you are. Elon returned to his work with a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't abandon his dreams, far from it, but he approached them differently now. He understood that while his work could change the world, it was his ability to live that would define him in the long run. And as he stood in front of his team, ready to dive back into the projects he had once felt consumed by, he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The future was still full of possibilities, but for the first time, Elon Musk was not chasing it. He was walking with it, side by side. And that, he realized, was the greatest achievement of all. The end of this chapter marked not just a resolution, but the start of something even greater. The journey had been long, and the lessons learned were invaluable. Elon Musk was no longer defined by the headlines or the accolades, but by his own understanding of what truly mattered, the ability to live fully in each moment. And as the world continued to move forward, so did he. But now, it was with a new sense of balance, a new sense of self, and perhaps, just maybe, that was the most revolutionary thing of all. The weeks that followed Elon's decision to take a step back were quiet. His days were filled with simple pleasures he had long neglected: the early morning runs, the long dinners with friends and family, the quiet moments of reflection. But as the days passed, something else began to stir within him. The weight of his responsibilities, his companies, his legacy, the expectation of the world, began to settle back in. He had stepped away from it all to heal, to find clarity, and now, he found himself at a crossroads again. Could he return to the world that had defined him for so long? The world that had once felt like a part of his very identity, with a fresh perspective? Or would he find himself slipping back into the same patterns, driven by the relentless need for more, faster, further? As the first signs of spring began to bloom around the cabin, Elon decided it was time to face the reality he had been avoiding. The decisions he had made, the path he had carved, and the consequences of those choices. One late afternoon, he called his closest colleagues to a private meeting. They had gathered in a room at a small, secluded retreat center that he had rented for the occasion. The sky outside was darkening, and the air was thick with anticipation. Clara, who had agreed to join him in this meeting as a sounding board, stood by his side. Elon took a deep breath before addressing the group. I've been away for a while, taking some time to reflect on everything, he began, his voice calm but resolute. And I've come to a realization that I think we need to talk about. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. His colleagues, some of whom had worked with him for years, exchanged wary glances. They knew Elon's work ethic, his drive. They knew that he had never been one to sit still for long. You've all supported me in building this vision. SpaceX, Tesla, the Boring Company, everything. And I've always believed that we were on the right path, Elon continued. But now, I'm questioning if it's enough. I've built empires, I've reshaped industries, but I'm starting to wonder if the cost has been too high. Clara stepped forward, offering him a reassuring look before turning to address the group. What Elon is saying is that we've all been so focused on the goal, the mission, that we've forgotten the people behind it, the team, the families, and ultimately, ourselves. He's not abandoning the mission, but it's time to rethink how we approach it. Elon nodded, his eyes scanning the room. He could feel the tension in the air, the uncertainty hanging like a cloud. I'm not asking for a complete shift away from the mission, but I think we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, what kind of legacy do we want to leave behind? Is it just about making history, or is it about making lives better, both for the world and for the people who make this work possible? One of his top executives, Sarah, spoke up hesitantly. Elon, are you saying that we've been focusing too much on the results and not enough on the process? That we need to change how we operate? Yes, Elon replied, his voice steady but filled with a weight of conviction. It's not enough to just build something groundbreaking. We have to build it together, with care, with respect for the people who work with us. We've been so focused on revolutionizing the world that we forgot to revolutionize how we treat the people making those revolutions possible. There was a long silence. It was clear that his words had struck a chord, but whether they were ready to embrace this shift, this new way of thinking, remained uncertain. Then, one of his senior engineers, Mike, stood up. You're asking us to do the impossible, Elon. You want us to change the culture of a company that's been built on intense pressure, on achieving the impossible every single day. How do we even begin to make that change? Elon sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. He had been wrestling with that same question for days. How could he ask people to embrace a new way of working when he himself had been the driving force behind the very culture they were now questioning? We start with ourselves, he said slowly. We start by changing the way we operate, one step at a time. It's not going to be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But we have to be willing to make that commitment, to create a work environment where people can thrive, where we value each other, where we're not just working towards a future but living it in the present. Clara stepped in again, offering her support. Change isn't about abandoning everything that came before. It's about taking what's been built and evolving it to create something better for everyone involved. Elon looked around at the faces in the room, reading the uncertainty in their eyes. He knew that some of them were skeptical, but there was also a spark of curiosity. They were willing to listen, willing to explore what this new path might look like. And for that, he was grateful. This is going to be a journey, Elon said quietly, but I think it's the right one. We're not just building the future anymore. We're building a better future for everyone who's part of this. After the meeting, Elon found himself alone in his thoughts. Clara, sensing his quiet reflection, joined him outside. The air had warmed slightly as spring took hold, and the trees were beginning to show signs of life once again. The world around him was shifting, and so was he. You're not backing down from your vision, Clara said softly, but you are changing the way you approach it. That's powerful. Elon nodded, his gaze on the horizon. I spent so much time building something that I thought would change the world, but I forgot to change the world in the process. I think it's time to fix that. Clara smiled, a look of understanding passing between them. Sometimes, the greatest revolution is the one you make within yourself. As they stood there, side by side, Elon realized that this moment, this shift in perspective, was the true beginning. The world was waiting for the next big thing, but perhaps the most important change was not a product, a company, or a mission. It was a shift in how he, and the people around him, viewed success, purpose, and the meaning of true progress. And that, he knew, would be the most lasting legacy of all. Elon's decision to change the way his companies operated was not one that was easily accepted by all. While some embraced the shift, others were uncertain. The pressure to deliver world-changing innovations remained high, and the old way of thinking, fast, relentless, and all-consuming, had created a culture that was hard to unravel. But Elon had made a promise to himself and to his team. This time, he was going to do it differently. It wasn't long before the effects of his decision began to ripple through the company. Some employees took notice of the subtle changes. The once rigid schedules were relaxed, allowing for more flexible work-life integration. Regular check-ins weren't just about deliverables, they were about well-being. Conversations about mental health and work-life balance started to happen openly in meetings. Elon had always been known for pushing the limits of what was possible, but now, he was equally focused on pushing the limits of what it meant to truly care for the people making those innovations happen. The transformation wasn't easy, and it wasn't always smooth. But with each step, the culture within his companies began to shift. For the first time, employees began to feel like they weren't just cogs in a machine. They were people, individuals with lives, passions, and challenges of their own. That recognition brought a sense of pride and ownership that had been missing before. People started showing up to work with a new sense of purpose, knowing that their efforts were valued not just for the results they delivered, but for the person they were. At home, Elon found that his relationships with his family also evolved. His children, who had often been a distant part of his life due to his hectic work schedule, became a central focus in his day-to-day life. They spent weekends together, hiking, camping, or just enjoying the simple things. It was in these moments that he truly understood the value of being present. Clara, too, had become more than just a guide during this period of self-reflection. She had become a constant source of stability, helping him navigate his new path. They had spent hours talking about life, purpose, and the kind of world they wanted to build, not just for themselves, but for future generations. One evening, after a particularly productive week, Elon found himself sitting on the porch of the cabin, Clara by his side. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the valley below. It felt like the world had slowed down, and for the first time in a long while, Elon was at peace with that. "You know, Clara," he said softly, "I thought that success was all about achieving goals, making history, and pushing boundaries. But I'm starting to realize that it's really about how we live while we're doing it. It's about the people we touch along the way, the relationships we build, and the legacy we leave behind. Not just through our work, but through the lives we affect." Clara smiled, her gaze warm and understanding. "You've always been about changing the world, Elon. But maybe now you're seeing that the way to change it isn't just by what we create. It's by how we live in it." Elon took a deep breath, looking at the horizon where the last remnants of daylight were fading into the night. He had come so far from the man who once thought only of the next big breakthrough, the next goal to conquer. Now, he understood that the true breakthrough was in his heart. Weeks later, during a highly anticipated press conference, Elon stood before a sea of journalists, his colleagues by his side. The world was still watching, waiting for his next big announcement. The cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust in his direction. But Elon had something else on his mind. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm yet full of conviction, "for years, I've been known as someone who pushes the boundaries of what's possible. But today, I'm here to tell you that I've learned something more important than just creating groundbreaking technology. I've learned that true progress doesn't come from just innovation. It comes from how we treat each other, how we build communities, and how we live our lives in a way that values every person who's part of the journey." The room fell silent. Elon paused, letting his words hang in the air. "We've made incredible strides in space exploration, electric vehicles, and sustainable energy. But now, I want to focus on something just as important, creating an environment where the people who make these advancements possible can thrive. We are a team, a family, and I believe that our greatest breakthroughs will come not just from what we create, but from how we live and work together." His words were met with a wave of applause from his team, and though there were some skeptical glances from the media, there was no denying the sincerity in his voice. This was no longer the Elon Musk of relentless ambition, solely driven by the next big idea. This was the Elon Musk who had come full circle, realizing that the journey was as important as the destination. As the conference ended, Elon felt a weight lift off his shoulders. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, not only for him but for the companies he had built. He had no illusions that it would be easy or that everyone would agree with the changes. But he knew that the path ahead, though uncertain, would be one of genuine transformation, not just in the industries he had shaped, but in the way he, and those around him, experienced the world. Later that night, as Elon sat alone in his office, reflecting on the events of the day, his phone buzzed with a message from Clara. "The future is shaped by the choices we make today. You've made a choice, Elon, and it's a beautiful one." He smiled, her words resonating deeply. The future wasn't just something to be built. It was something to be lived, cherished, and nurtured in every moment. Elon had finally understood that true success wasn't about outpacing the world. It was about walking alongside it, creating not just history, but a legacy that would last long after the headlines faded. The journey had come full circle, and now it was time to move forward, not as the world expected, but as he had always dreamed.